Welcome to episode 216 of the Disorganized Wizards Club podcast. My name is Alex. I'm joined here by my co-host Cam.
Hello, hello.
We're a pair of Ottawa-based players that play just about anything and everything we can qualify for. Talk about decks, tournament stories, just about anything to help you and ourselves get better at Magic. It is week one, Kaldheim. A new set dropped yesterday. Tons of new cards, tons of new decks. It's the most exciting time in Magic, week one. I love it.
Yeah, it's a wild time out there. And you know, okay, Stilly, I got a proposition for you.
Okay.
Despite having done over 200 episodes of a podcast in which, I think we make pretty good content, and despite it being an exciting time in Magic and us being very invested in this hobby, do you want to sell our collections, sell the brand name, take all our Patreon money, and buy GameStop stock?
It's only going up, right? Up and up forever?
Up always. Stocks only go up.
Okay. I'm in. Let's do it.
But I just, like, if anyone's been following, then you probably know some of the details. That yesterday, a bunch of stockbroker platforms barred trading for a bit, which really just reminded me of, like, the grumpy old Magic shop owner watching kids, like, sell cards to each other and just screaming, "You can't do that in my store."
Oh, man. Dude, every time I hear something new about what's going on, it just makes me so happy.
It's such a wild story.
It's been unbelievable. Oh, man. I've seen so many good memes about it, too.
It's just peak internet.
Yeah.
The collective, like, unguided masses kind of tumbling in the same direction while making jokes and memes.
I saw a really good one the other day where it's like, rich people, poor people should just invest their money. Poor people. Okay. Rich people, ... Wait, no, stop.
Not like that. That's not what I meant.
Oh, yeah. It's so good. So good. So Kaldheim dropped yesterday. We had the early access event this week on Wednesday. We played a whole bunch of decks. It was a really great time. Thanks, everyone who tuned into the stream. We'll be returning to DWC Versus, I guess, next week, right? Kaldheim's out. So if anyone wants to catch more streams from us, we'll be streaming every Wednesday night, twitch.tv/Disorganized Wizard Club. The VOD from the event is still up as well. So if you want to check out all the decks we played, you can. I posted 2 new YouTube videos this week, one with 5 new decks for Kaldheim Standard. And I also posted all of the gameplay from our Jund mid-range deck from early access. So if you want to check that out, youtube.com/the Disorganized Wizard Club to check out those videos. I'll most likely post some gameplay of at least one of the other decks as well. So be on the lookout for that. And also, got to shout out our sponsor, wizardtower.com. Check them out for all your Magic single needs. Kaldheim is up. Go and get your hands on it. wizardtower.com.
Yeah, get some cards. Get some of the valuable chase mythics. The value only goes up. Hold them for a bit. Sell them later. Value.
Yeah. Hashtag stonks. All right.
Yeah, so the early access. We had brought a bunch of different brews, and we're going to go through and tell you sort of our thoughts on each of them, talk about how we did. But just in general, let's start with some overall cards that impressed.
Sounds good. Kicking it off with our number 1 card from our top 10 episode last week, Valky, God of Lies. This card is as good as we thought it was. And it's why we put it at number 1, of course, because we're big brain geniuses.
Yeah, we played it in early access. I played it a bit since then. Well, since then, it's been one day. I played it a bit the next day. And just the backside is obviously nuts. But the fact that the backside is a free roll, that it's not stuck in your hand early, we said would be powerful. It is incredibly powerful. And I think the biggest point that speaks to the power of this card is that even in games where it quote unquote whiffed and the opponent didn't have creatures in hand and it didn't take anything, the information was still so strong on a 2-drop with like a reasonable body.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the first time I saw Valky exile a god from an opponent's hand and then turn itself into said god and then sit and play for the rest of the game as an indestructible permanent, I was all in.
Yeah. And even the fact that that's mechanic, like, if you're not casting Tybalts and you have 2 Valkyries in hand, they're still not dead because you can transform the first one and then the second one doesn't get legend ruled. The card just plays so well with itself constantly at all points in the game.
Oh, yeah. So we played this card in Jund. We played it in red-black sack. We played it in red-black mid-range. We saw a bunch of people casting it. The card is just unbelievably good.
It's minus. Just steals. You just get to cast the card later. That's so wild. The minus is just kill a creature, draw a card.
Yep.
Draw a good card.
Mm-hmm. Draw whatever card is giving you the most problems. Yeah. Really, really impressed with Valky. Definitely a good card to spend your Mythic Wildcards on. Luckily for me, in the 50 packs I pre-ordered, I opened 3 Valkies, which is the number I've been playing in all my red-black decks. So it just worked out perfectly.
Wow, so lucky.
Yeah.
I opened 0.
I'm whitelisted. It's insane.
I had a lot of wild cards, though. I'd been grinding drafts leading up to this set in preparation.
I haven't been grinding drafts. I still have a decent amount of rares, but I have like 2 or 3 mythics. But I have like 9 draft, like free drafts saved up.
Oh, yeah.
So I could just draft for the first time in a year and go through all those and probably get some cards.
No, I'm like wild card Wall Street over here. I got like 30 rare wild cards and 30 mythic and 40 rare.
Oh my God. There's a rolling in it. That's insane.
Yeah. That's like after I built a bunch of decks. Anyway.
All right, next card that really impressed us, Goldspan Dragon. We had this card at number 5 on our list. Honestly, it should have been number 2.
Yeah, probably. Like putting Doomscar at 2, it's a unique effect, but it's still sort of just a removal spell. Goldspan Dragon has been whomping people.
Yeah. This card might see the most play out of every card in the set, to be honest.
I'm starting to think that. I knew that it made mana because that's what it says it does. But I didn't like internalize how much mana this thing actually makes.
It's like a lot.
Minimum 2. And that's if it lives or dies. If it lives, it makes 2. If it dies, it makes 2. Usually, because they're targeting it. I mean, there's scenarios where it gets wrathed and it makes 1, but whatever. And often it makes more than that. Or if they're in multiples, it just continues to make more. And like,
yeah,
some of the decks I've been experimenting with recently, and which I saw a bit in early access and a bit just on ladder, take advantage of the fact that there's many Foretell cards that cost 2, and the adventures on Brazen Borrower and Bone Crusher Giant cost 2. So you can like, quote, tap out for this on 5 and still have interaction up, and that's insane. And the other thing, which I saw an opponent do, and then I started doing, which is confirmed nuts, is that Goldspan Dragon curves perfectly into Ugin. If you have a 6 land, you can cast Ugin the next turn, whether they kill it or not, because of the aforementioned 2 mana anyway. So, yeah, wild card.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen people playing this in blue-red decks, pairing it with counter spells, which has just looked unbelievably good. Playing it in red-based mid-range decks, red-based aggressive decks. It's like in almost every single red deck I've played against, I've seen this card. People are playing it everywhere. It has uses everywhere. It's been super, super impressive.
And I don't even know how you stop it really effectively. Like what? You start playing things like Soul Shatter so that you don't have to target it?
Yeah, and hope that your opponent just didn't have a bigger creature in play already.
Yeah, I mean, they probably won't because it costs 5, but so yeah, you can probably tag it, but then like Soul Shatter is kind of clunky anyways. You're just hoping you can hit it. Anyway, Goldspan Dragon is very cool, very, very strong. And another positive for this card, the animation is pretty sweet and not too long, in my opinion.
It is a sweet animation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just starts like flexing on your opponent. That's what everybody wants to do. You put it on the board, it flexes its wings, and it charges forward.
Yeah. So this is another card I wouldn't hesitate to spend Mythic Wildcards on. Definitely a good investment. You'll see a ton of play out of this card. It's seeing play in multiple different archetypes. It's really, really good.
Yeah, I already got my 4.
Nice. Next card that impressed, that we didn't have on our top 10, Cosmos Charger, which if anyone doesn't know, it's the 4-mana 3/3 flying horse that allows you to foretell on any turn for 1 less mana. And we played this in our blue-white Foretell flash deck. And I played against it a couple times too. And I really just didn't realize upon reading this card how powerful it was to be able to foretell for 1 less mana whenever you want.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually just a mana mechanic. Like a lot of the foretell costs on cards are balanced so that you're paying the same amount anyway. So this is just discounting cards by 1. And the flexibility to foretell on your opponent's turn, if you didn't need to cast, say, some of the cards you already had foretold, just ramps up how efficient you can be with your mana. Even though like foretell is already a mechanic that makes your mana use very efficient, it just becomes even more so.
Yeah. It was definitely a sleeper for me. I honestly, I don't know how it lines up in an actual best of 3 format though. Because obviously the decks you see in early access aren't gonna really look like what they will once the format's actually out and people are playing best of 3 games. So
yeah, that's true.
I don't know how this thing faces up against, better decks in the format, but it is definitely doing something really powerful. And I 100% just overlooked it at the start.
Mm-hmm. Just, I guess, as a note here in general, since we're talking about foretell, I think foretell is stronger than I expected it to be. And I expected it to be strong. But, like, I was playing a Grixis deck, and the fact that you can kind of safely take turn 2 off to foretell something, for instance, the counterspell saw it coming, and then on turn 3 I'd like Blood Chief's Thirst something and have a counterspell up without needing double blue. It's a full counterspell for 2 mana. Like, there's just so much flexibility and so much power you get from taking turn 2 off, which in a lot of decks isn't a very important turn.
Mm-hmm.
It's wild.
Yeah, definitely. Another card, we talked about it in honorable mentions, but we didn't put it on our list because we generally stay away from removal spells. But Binding the Old Gods was unbelievably good. Clean catch-all answer that also ramps you. I don't think I ever got value out of the 3rd chapter, but the 3rd chapter is irrelevant. You just play it for the first one. The first 2 is what are very strong. Yeah, like it was good in every deck we played it in. It was good every time it was cast against us, except for one game when we had it because of a card that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But
let's just mention it now. Vorniclex also impressed. We didn't play it, but we got smacked by it a few times.
Yeah, when we were playing our Abs and Yorion deck, there was one game where we had a Binding the Old Gods in our hand and Elspeth Conquers Death in hand. I think we had a Yorion in hand as well and a Binding in play. The board, we were ahead on board. Things were looking pretty good for us. Didn't think we could lose in any way, shape, or form because of all the removal we had. And then our opponent cast a Vorniclex, and all of a sudden, all the cards we had didn't have text anymore.
So if anyone's not familiar with this interaction, because we actually missed it at first too. We just wasted a card not realizing. But Vorniclex stops the opponent's things from getting counters. Like if they would get a counter of any type, they get one less. Which means none of your sagas get any counters. Which means none of their things ever trigger. So they just don't do anything. ECD does nothing. Binding does nothing. You can play them. They'll just be an enchantment with no counters that doesn't have a trigger.
Yeah. It killed us real quick. That's for sure.
If green is around and you think your opponent might have a Vorniclex, I don't know, sideboard like some Murderous Riders or some Heartless Axe or something. I don't know. Just don't rely only on sagas.
It's not safe to just rely on your sagas anymore. That's for sure. Yeah, and then
I don't think we saw our opponents ever take advantage of the beneficial part of Vorniclex. Like I don't think anybody ever put extra counters on anything, except someone had a Vivian, and the token they made got 2 reach counters, so that was pretty strong.
Yeah, and I mean the Vivian had more counters on it as well when it entered.
Yeah,
so that
was Planeswalker got more counters.
That was the only thing we saw, but I mean that was really good. So
yeah, that was
yeah, definitely impressed. Killed me on 2 occasions during early access, and killed me very fast.
Yeah, just huge too. Huge in attacking.
Yeah, massive. Big lad.
Another card which became big and had a lot of counters. Cosima. This was on our list at number 9 because we thought that there was potential here, but we weren't sure maybe how to support it. So we tried our hardest. We played it in just a dedicated Landfall deck, and it did impress us.
It was good.
8 with it pretty easily one game.
Yeah. Yeah, drew 8 cards, yeah. it was good. I saw people playing it in like teamer mid-range based around Kinnan, just Spear Sentinel, Magda, getting value out of both sides of the card.
Yeah, like the game we drew 8 was obviously exceptional, but there were also a few games where we would draw, 1 or 2 with it, and that was also pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Just a warning, the buttons are a bit awkward on Arena. They don't quite read the way you think they do.
Yeah.
If it's in exile and you play a land and you want it to stay there, you have to click take action, which seems backwards, but...
Yeah, the first time I used it incorrectly. Didn't get any value from it, and then still won the game because we just threw it into exile again next turn and then drew cards later.
Yeah, I heard of a couple other streamers making the same mistake, but yeah, Cosima quite good. And also, like, this was another card that I played the following day a bit to try and see how it would go. And like I got paired against mono red and I played it on turn 3 and I just didn't exile it. It's just a 2/4. That's not easy for them to get through.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, impressive card.
Yeah, it was very good. Maybe underrated a little bit by us, but I mean, we underrated it because it's just such a weird card. So I don't know. I'm willing. At least we had it on our list.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, still counted as a W.
Yeah. So underwhelming, I guess now to the opposite. Cards we saw throughout the day were things we saw throughout the day that were kind of underwhelming. For the most part, I think what our opponent was doing made sense and seemed fine. Some of the snow decks seemed a bit like they were just from limited, though. I mean, there were some mono green decks using snow-covered forests for the 1-mana fight spell that pumps something and gives it indestructible, and that card seemed good.
That spell was very good, yeah. That spell was by far the best snow spell I saw all day.
So I imagine if snow spells get played, we saw actually Tundra Fumarole get played at some point as a 3-mana removal spell that they then used the mana it makes to do something else. They had like a very efficient turn against it.
Yeah, someone cast a Tundra Fumarole, killed our creature, and then cast a Maze Mind Tome off the mana.
Yeah, see, like that was
pretty good, yeah.
And so I imagine, okay, so the dedicated snow strategies we saw where like everything was snow, they were trying to do snow permanent stuff, seemed like draft decks. But the strategies that were like sort of existed already, that were playing snowlands for like a snow card and its effect, seemed all right for some of the snow effects. And I imagine that's how it ends up in the standard format.
Yeah, overall, I don't think Snow is going to be a top contender in Constructed.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be its own archetype.
No, not quite there for me. But it's still early; anything could happen. I just, yeah,
I agree.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about the decks we played during early access. We played 5 games with all of the decks we played. We streamed for 10.5 hours. It was a long day.
You streamed for the whole time. I had to pop in and out.
Yeah, it was a long day, but it was super fun. Learned a lot. Got to see a ton of new cards. All of the decks that we talk about, they're currently up in our Discord. So if you remember the Discord channel, you can head to Speculation Brews tab and check them all out. I'll also post all of them on Twitter. You can find us at DWC Podcast 1 there. And 5 of the lists that we'll be talking about are actually in that YouTube video I mentioned earlier. So if you check out our channel, the Disorganized Wizards Club on YouTube, you'll be able to find that video as well. Tons of places to check them out. Starting off with Black-White Clerics. We went 2 and 3 with this deck. And there are some really good starts that this deck had. But overall, it just felt a little bit underpowered versus what our opponents were doing.
Yeah, I agree. Being a tribal deck, it is inherently softer to removal than other creature decks because you need those sort of multi-creature synergies. A lot of its payoff comes from gaining a lot of life, which every deck in Magic is designed to reduce your opponent's life. So it's sort of, you're competing against the game itself. And yeah, there are some good draws there. Glorious Protector is pretty good at, saving your deck from board wipes and stuff. Righteous Valkyrie does gain a ton of life, and as a 2/4 for 3 mana is quite annoying, but trying to Archfiend's Vessel or use Speaker of the Heavens was a bit too unreliable. And so you kind of just ended up with 1/1s in your deck that you're trying to play standard with, which wasn't good enough.
Yeah, so I built this deck to be basically just black-white aggro with the 8/1 drops. You have Luminarch Aspirant, Cleric of Life's Bond, and a few copies of Null Priest of Oblivion and 2 at the 2 slot. 4 Righteous Valkyrie, 3 Tabaraks at 3, 2 Glorious Protector at 4, 18 lands plus 4 Aghanim's Awakening and 2 Amiria's a Call, 4 Bloodchief's Thirst, and then 4 Rally the Ranks. So, like I said, low to the ground, aggressive, pumping, creatures boosting each other, Rally the Ranks to do it as well. And yeah, it just didn't quite get there. We did play against a version of Black-White Clerics that went a lot harder onto the life gain side of things and played cards like Call of the Death Dweller as well. And
I think that was actually a pretty important pickup for that person's version, because our version is sort of soft to Wraths. Like if we got Wrath or if all our creatures died and you're stuck with like Rally of the Ranks in play, that card's not doing anything anymore.
Yeah, our version has 4 Aghanim's Awakening, so we do have outs to deal with that, but having the calls as well was definitely good. When we played against that deck, I feel like they gained probably 70 life against us before we finally killed them.
There's multiple turns where we'd attack them from 16 down to like 2, and then the next turn they'd be at 16 again.
Yeah, we were playing Winota, and I think we actually got every single possible Winota hit out of our deck during that game over multiple turns, and our opponent just gained so much life every single turn. They were playing the 4 mana artifact that if you have less life than your starting life total, you gain 2 life, but if you have more, you draw a card.
Cosmos Elixir, I think it's called.
Yeah. We were dealing so much damage to them, they never actually got to draw a card off of it. But it was like Cam said, their life total was a yo-yo. It was like at 19, down to 2, 17, down to 3, 18, down to 2. It was just back and forth like that over multiple turns.
And then the first turn that they drew a land, they died.
Yeah. Yeah. We're just waiting for them to brick because they have no cards in hand. And every turn they drew a card that just gained them almost 20 life. We're like, come on. Oh my God. They had 3 Clerics of Life's Bond in play that were 8/8s or bigger, but just couldn't block our Basri's Lieutenant that were pro multicolor. It was insanity. But yeah, I think if we're going to build Black-White Clerics, I don't know if you need to go as all in on the life gain stuff with Cosmos Elixir or whatever. That card doesn't seem great to me, but playing more ways to reanimate your creatures. So playing Call of the Death Dweller. We weren't playing Aura, Sky Hierophant. Our opponent was. That card shut down some attacks from us for a decent amount of time. So that card's probably worth an inclusion as well. So just go a little harder on graveyard synergies and maybe you'll have something. But from what we saw, our version just wasn't quite doing it.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Our next deck that we went 2-3 with was Abzan Yorion. This was it's 80-card Yorion deck built around In Search of Greatness, the food package with Gilded Goose, Wicked Wolf, Trail of Crumbs, and it's also a Doom Foretold deck. And this deck, there's definitely a build of Abzan Yorion that's good. I feel like we got a little bit this was the deck we were playing where we just got cheesed by the Vorinclex. And just died. But
so had we known about that interaction and built our deck a bit differently, maybe we would have had an out that game. So perhaps you could consider this a 2/2. But
yeah, the list I have posted is playing 2 Garrett Cursed Huntsman. But when we actually played the games, we swapped it out for the 6-drop demon,
Burning Rune Demon,
because someone cast it against us and it looked pretty good. And it was impressive when we cast it. We were able to search out 2 removal spells to guarantee we would get 1. And it It was impressive, but obviously by doing that, we left ourselves with no way to deal with a Vorinclex in our main deck. And being only best of one games, we were kind of cool to that. But I think this deck is better than its record shows. We only played 5 games, so, take that as you will. But really what I wanted to learn from this deck is In Search of Greatness good? And I think I only cast it once, but the game I cast 2 free spells off it, so it was nuts.
And then cried for a bit, and then we sacked it to Doom Foretold, so it sort of also edicted our opponent once.
But and then out of the 3 losses, one of those losses I had an In Search of Greatness in my hand, but I couldn't cast it because I was having mana problems. So the Abzan Shell, there is 100% something here. In Search of Greatness, I still don't know. I do think the Doom for Toots shell with it is on the right track, though. I will say that.
Yeah, it's a good spot for it. In Search of Greatness as well, it might take a moment, like a few weeks or something, or a bit of iteration, to find the right card advantage to support it so that you can continually cast things. We saw Fires of Invention go through sort of a similar thing. It took people a little bit to figure out the right mix of card advantage and such to support the fact that you technically have a do nothing card that you have to, like, it's making you mana, but it's not killing your opponent.
Yeah.
So once people figure that out, then In Search of Greatness, I think it's only going to get better with testing and with tuning. And it already seemed like there is some potential there. One note I would say, Stelly mentioned we played Burning Rune Demon, which is quite good in Yorion. You can flicker it, draw a bunch of cards. What I would do in any Burning Rune deck, especially if you're an 80 card deck, put 1 Balaged Recovery in your mana base so that if there's some particular card you need to get, you can search out, your Silver Bullet and Balaged Recovery, and no matter what they do, you can get your Silver Bullet.
Yeah, we didn't have Balaged Recovery in the list that you're most likely looking on if you're following
along. Afterthought. I realized this after we played our games.
Yeah, because we didn't have Burning Rune Demon in the original list. But if you are playing Burning Rune Demon, Cam is 100% right. That is an interaction that we just overlooked until after we had already played the games.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, this deck is, if you're short on Mythic wildcards and you're not really sure what to do with the format to start, I mean, there's no new Mythics in this version of the deck. The new cards are the In Search of Greatness, Binding the Old Gods, and then Pathways. So you're not on the hook for a bunch of wild cards to start. Mostly just cost you some rares, and you're doing powerful stuff. The food package is tried and true, incredibly powerful. There's a bunch of creature decks that just can't ever deal with the Wicked Wolf. And yeah, In Search of Greatness, still not sure, but I will say the one game I got to use it, it was very good.
Another interesting thing, not in our list, but we saw an opposing Abzan Yorion player do this. The runes that draw a card, the new runes, they're 2-mana enchantments from Kaldheim. You can put them on any permanent. So like if you have nothing going on, you can put them on your lands. And they have ETB draw a card. So if you're not playing blue, they can function similar to Omen of the Sea. Good flicker targets for Yorion. And if you end up playing a list that has Treacherous Blessings, you can suit up some creature you have to gain back some of that life. So I think there's room there for experimentation as well.
Yeah. That was better than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, the white rune was quite interesting. Yeah. I almost said strong. It probably was quite strong. It was good.
I'll take interesting. Okay. Next deck was 4-color Landfall. I posted 2 versions of the deck, one with 4 colors and one with 3. The 3 colors just Bant, and then this one is green-white based, splashing blue and black. Splash for blue is Cosima, God of the Voyage. Splash for black is Mythos of Nethroi and Binding the Old Gods. And then we're playing the green-white Landfall deck that has kind of just been floating around the fringes of Standard, playing Lotus Cobra, Marasa Root Grazer, Kazandu Mammoth, Scoot Swarm, Felidar Retreat, bunch of lands. That's the deck. And the idea here was I wanted to maximize the value we could get out of Cosima. We're playing a full 8 fetch lands in the mana base for Evolving Wilds for Fabled Passage, obviously because fetch lands are incredibly good with Cosima. And I didn't actually play the Bant version of the deck because I wanted to be greedy and play black. We went 3-2, and the deck actually impressed me a lot. Cosima was very good. Binding the Old Gods was really good. People still can't beat Felidar Retreat. Honestly, like the Scoot Swarms were the least impressive card in the deck.
Yeah, Scoot Swarm and Mammoth, if you're looking for room to add things in, I would cut those without a heartbeat if there's something I thought was better.
Yeah, I mean, Mammoth is a fine inclusion because it's a land, and we just want as much lands as possible. So if you're replacing those, I would look to replace them with other modal double face cards.
Good point. Yeah,
but in most scenarios, we just always won with Felidar Retreat. So maybe you don't need to play 4 Retreat, 4 Scoot Swarm. You could cut on those and maybe play some other threat to kind of attack from different angles or do something weird. Maybe play Planeswalkers in that slot. Who knows? But the core of what we were doing with Cosima was very powerful. That being said, though, it was early access, and people always just play way less interaction than they should. So our Cosima literally never died in any matchup. No one ever killed it.
Yeah, once it's huge, it's obviously harder for them to kill it. But
yeah. But
still,
every time we cast a Cosima, it survived a turn and got into exile, which is what I'm getting at. Like, it was never killed the turn we played it. So it always got to do its thing and looked impressive.
But even if the format becomes, like, if Cosima ends up good enough that people have to start building their decks in order to kill it the turn it's played, that's the mark of a good card. That's how people treat Lotus Cobra. That's how people treat Omnath. That's how people treat good creatures. So that's even fine.
That's true. And I mean, with this deck, it does have multiple creatures that kind of demand an answer right away. You know, you play that turn 2 Lotus Cobra, people have just kind of been trained to that card needs to die immediately. The Cosima also kind of puts that pressure on you. The Scoot Swarm also puts that pressure on you. So a lot of must-answer threats in this deck. Landfall hasn't quite been there yet, but I think Cosima is a piece that can make this viable against a lot of decks in the format.
Honestly, even if it's not Cosima, it might be Binding the Old Gods.
Yeah.
Like, Binding the Old Gods was best for us in this deck. It's why I think I would stay 4-color or maybe even just Abzan if you decide Cosima is not worth it. Because a removal spell that then synergizes with all your landfall triggers was so strong.
Yeah. And, you know, even though we were a 4-color deck, we never actually had mana issues from what I said. We had slow starts because we were playing a bunch of Triomes and a bunch of, you know, Evolving Wilds and Fabled Passages. But cards like Felidar Retreat do a lot for catching you up real quick.
Oh, yeah.
So even though we only went 3-2, I do think some version of this Landfall deck is worth exploring further.
It's fun to play, too.
Yeah, and I mean, who knows how this looks in a best-of-3 environment either. So
true.
We'll see.
All right, so for 4-color Landfall, we did not have mana issues, surprisingly. But with the next deck, Naya counters, boy, did we have mana issues.
Oh, mana issues aplenty. We were just trying to do too many things with this deck. The mana requirements for turn 2, when none of your dual lands are actual dual lands outside of like a couple. And what I mean is, like, although pathways are dual lands, they don't actually produce both colors of mana when they're in play. And this deck playing Conclave Mentor and a card like Bone Crusher Giant, both cards that you want to be able to cast on turn 2, it's just not possible when you're relying on so many pathways and basics.
Yeah. So the important thing here, like Stelly mentioned, that we had slow starts with 4-color Landfall, but that was because we were playing actual duels and triomes, and we were setting up to like have a robust mana base that could make a bunch of different colors. If you're willing to play a slower deck that has those slow starts, then sure, you can play those colors. But if anything, this Naya counters is proof of concept that while pathways are strong for aggressive strategies, they can't support aggressive 3-color strategies, at least not the way this deck was built.
Yeah, and not in the 3-color strategies that don't have access to triomes, which is pretty huge.
Well.
A triome would have done a lot for this deck. We didn't have it. The mana was awkward in every single game. But what I do like about counters is that the archetype still felt fine. Snakeskin Veil was really good when we had it. If there is, like, we were playing basically just green-white counters, splashing red for Bone Crusher Giant and Showdown of the Scalds. And I think if the counters deck is going to exist, it's probably just green-white, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, in Brewing, we added the red really for Showdown because the second and third triggers on Showdown, putting counters on things, I thought would be a good like card advantage support for the counters aggressive deck. And unfortunately, we never really got to cast it. I don't think it came up in any of our games with this deck.
Yeah.
But so not quite sure how that plays there, but just due to the mana issues, it's likely not worth it because the games we did win were basically just green-white games. And if you're a fan of counters type strategies, they haven't really been able to keep up in Standard, but I don't think they need much from the new set other than Snakeskin Veil. I think that alone breathes so much new life into just green-white counters that it might exist single-handedly because of it.
Yeah. If I were to continue with this deck, honestly, and still want it to be Naya, I think Showdown of the Scalds is fine, but playing Bone Crusher Giant is just hinders your mana early too much. So you can drop those, and then you don't have to worry about, fighting between casting Conclave Mentor and Bone Crusher Giant on 2. So
yeah, I agree.
You could definitely drop those. Be less focused on red because red on turn 4 is, a lot easier on your mana when it comes to casting your spells early. So you could drop the Bone Crusher Giants, play something else in that slot. Maybe you want to play Swarm Shambler on 1 or some other 2-drop that I can't think of because I'm just making this up as I go. But
something.
That would definitely be a change I would make. Although I do love Bone Crusher Giant. I think in this deck, because of the mana base you have access to, it's not worth it.
So, okay, I think this is a good point to elaborate on something else I think I'm beginning to notice about this format. Now that Uro is banned, there's not really many decks that, are escaping a ton of stuff from their graveyard, at least not yet. But my point is that Fabled Passage was kind of a staple. Every deck in Standard, I think, played like 2 to 4 of them, just to fix mana. But especially if you're trying to curve out early, when turns 2 and 3 are important, I think now that all the pathways are in Standard, you can just, like if you're a 3-color deck, I think it might be better to play 0 Fabled Passage and 12 pathways. The fact that pathways are basically what Passage is, basics, but they're untapped always. As long as you can sequence well, like you'll have the colors that you would have needed from a Fabled Passage usually. And then where you were playing Passage, that makes room, like Passage is a tapped land early, you can replace that with some like actual duels to shore up the mana issues that pathways cause. My point, anyway, my summary point here is that I think Passage might be a little bit overplayed in this Standard now that we have all the pathways. And actually, the decks I was playing yesterday, just brewing, like an Abzan deck, like a Grixis control and a Jeskai control deck, I just stopped playing Pathway and my mana was fine and it was usually always untapped.
You stopped playing Passage, you mean?
Passage, Fabled Passage, yeah. Okay. Stop playing Fabled Passage.
Also, while you were talking, you mentioned Graveyard. I figured out the card to replace Bone Crusher with. Just play Scavenging Ooze. Yeah. Scavenging Ooze seems like a great inclusion. So, yeah, do that.
That would be very good.
Croxa is still seeing a lot of play in this format. That would be an easy swap, I'd say.
Yeah. So, I guess on my mana base rant, if you're playing Croxa or things like Ox, Fabled Passage is good. But try playing without it. I think that a lot of decks don't actually need it, and we've been a bit tricked.
All right. Next list, still a Naya deck. Also went 3-2. This is Naya Winota. It was a version of the deck that a member of our Discord channel linked to us. I made a bunch of changes to it, made it a little more streamlined. And it was fine. Maya Bredegard Protector as a hit was very good for Winota. But
Yeah.
like we had mana issues with this deck too, I feel like.
So it was a deck that went 3-2, but while you were playing with it, it didn't feel like you were going 3-2. You know, it felt like a 2-3 or a 1-4 deck. Like,
yeah.
The only green cards are Gilded Goose and Maya, Bredegard Protector. And the Goose being in our deck messed up our mana more than we drew it.
Yeah.
And
I think I just built the deck poorly, to be honest. We could go a little harder into green and things probably were a little bit better. Honestly, I just don't think we were playing enough lands. There were so many games where we're stuck on 3.
There's only 23 here. Yeah. That's probably just it. So if you're looking at this list, it needs a couple extra lands. Maybe you could go harder on the green. But I think, honestly, again, a sort of a power of the pathways. If you just play a red-white mana base and mix in the green pathways, you could play like red-white Winota with Maya in your deck as a hit. By the time turn 5 comes around, you probably will have had a green source that you could have played as green because your other colors are shored up.
Yeah.
And just having Maya as that extra Winota hit might be all it takes for this archetype to sort of go back over the top.
Yeah, just play a red-white aggressive game plan early and then have Winota to top things off with Maya. Abandon Gilded Goose. It'll do wonders for your mana. I like those points.
Yeah, Glorious Protector was quite good here. Just, you're a deck that has to commit to the board, so it gives you some protection from wraths. But also, if you're having maybe a bit of a slower start, it's a non-human that you can surprise a Winota trigger on your opponent. You can flash it in, untap Winota, get a trigger. Doesn't give them much room to interact.
Yeah. Yeah. So this version of the deck, I'll make those changes and post a version that I would recommend going forward if you wanted to stick on some Naya Winota based, so people can spare themselves the brutal mana requirements of this one. So the version you're looking at is most likely updated.
Yeah. Once those fixes or those changes are made, it played like Winota of old.
Yep.
Felt like you were behind, not sure what to do. Draw Winota, YOLO attack with everything, and your opponent dies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nothing's changed there. All right. Moving into our powerhouse decks from the day. Jund Midrange. Jund Midrange was the deck I was most excited to play. New cards in this list being Valky, God of Lives, Goldspan Dragon, Binding the Old Gods, and the main deck, plus your pathways in the mana base. This deck felt really good. Every match we played, Food Package was fantastic, Valky was fantastic, Goldspan Dragon was fantastic. The one of Ugin was a house. Binding was great. Everything felt very cohesive and played really well together. I actually played a couple games late at night as well, and when the stream was off with this deck and just crushed everyone with it. I really like this strategy. You came in, I think, 3 games.
I saw the last 2 games.
Yeah, so you didn't get to see all of them, but there's something here, I think. You have pieces to go toe-to-toe with the popular decks that existed in the format before. Like I said, there was a lot of really good creature decks in the format before. The Wicked Wolf package is just excellent in that scenario. You have Ugin, as you know, just a reset for troublesome permanents. Binding the Old Gods is a catch-all for basically everything except a Vorinclex. And then, yeah, like you were talking about, Goldspan being able to ramp you into that Ugin. It was great for not only that, but just having that excess mana lying around to, pump into a Trail of Crumbs, spend on a Stomp, use to make a food token, like whatever we wanted to do with it, it had value in our deck.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I think, so this was the first deck we started with, and then later we sort of refined our appreciation for Goldspan Dragon. Were the Garriks instrumental or that important to the deck, or would you maybe think of taking those out, going up to, say, 4 Goldspan Dragon, 2 Ugin, or maybe 4 Dragon, 4 Valky, because Goldspan Dragon also ramps into Tybalt?
It's hard to say. The Garrics were good every time I had them. I definitely won a game because of a Garrick. So I think I'd have to play a little bit more before I decide on that one. Maybe I'm a little biased too because I just love Garrick as a card.
That's true. But like, so that game where you won it because of Garrick, would you also have won it had it been an Ugin?
I mean, if it was like, yeah. I mean, so I guess. Well, I don't know if I would have had enough mana to live.
Yeah, that could be the issue.
That's the thing. Like, I don't think I would have been able to get there in time to live. But if I had been able to, obviously Ugin would have won the game immediately.
Yeah.
Or actually, maybe not, because the game I'm thinking about was against a mono green snow elves, and they had a couple of the snow creature land, which Ugin wouldn't have been able to save me against. So I don't know. I'm definitely starting with this version of the deck, still playing Garrick, and we'll have to play a lot more games before I decide if it deserves its slot or not. But early on in the games I played so far, Garrick has been really good for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, this list seems sweet. It's a good home for Valky Goldspan Dragon. And just the Jund colors have so many powerful cards in Standard that, yeah, if you want to diversify the plan of like your red-black mid-range decks, Jund seems like a good way to go.
Yeah, 100% agree. Next 4-1 deck, we have red-black Sacrifice. So this deck built around some of the powerhouses that were in Standard before: Claim the Firstborn, Woe Strider, Village Rites. We have Timurit Calls the Dead, Croxa, Mire Triton, couple copies of Bone Crusher Giant, couple copies of Murderous Rider. The new additions for this deck were Immersturm Predator, 1 Egon God of Death, 3 Valky God of Lies in the main deck. So what we learned from this deck was a few things we could already assume already. Just other creature decks had a really, really hard time going toe-to-toe with you. Valky was fantastic. The one time we had an Egon God of Death, we cast it on turn 1 as its backside, and it was excellent. We probably lose that game if we didn't have it, because there were multiple turns where we needed to escape something, and we had exactly the amount of cards in our graveyard that we needed to be able to do it because of Throne.
Mm-hmm. This list I'm looking at doesn't have the Lilianas, but we did play Lilianas, right?
Lilianas is in the red-black mid-range deck.
Okay, right. So I'm thinking of a different one.
You're thinking about the other red-black deck.
Yeah, all right. Let's Sacrifice.
Yeah. So when it comes to Immersturm Predator, it was good. Maybe we don't need 3 copies of it. You can probably shave 1. There was at least one game where we were just, stuck with a couple of copies in hand, and we just had better things to do with our mana. Mm-hmm. But it definitely is worth an occlusion, though. I do like the card. It was good.
Yeah, the game that was in play, we were able to grow it sort of end of turn. Then when it attacked, it became a 5/5, so we could attack past, I think it was a Goldspan Dragon or something in the air. Maybe it was a Yorion.
Yeah, that sounds right.
The fact that we were able to grow it just to get in good attacks was very powerful. Obviously, it's hard to interact with. And the Claim the Firstborn is an incredibly powerful card, but it needs support. Like, it's not a card you can play if you're not very, very consistently having a sack outlet. So Immersturm Predator adding some additional ones on top of Village Rites and Woe Strider powers up the Claim the Firstborns as well. So I agree with Stelly. Maybe 3 is too many because this deck is just inherently so low to the ground. But some number is nice to have.
Yeah.
The Akroan War, did we ever draw it?
I don't know if we drew it.
I don't think we drew it. Would you keep it around? I feel like it has a similar issue as like just being 4 mana, and
this is a metagame dependent kind of thing. If the metagame early on is looking a lot like last format with tons of Gruul aggro, mono green decks floating around, that sort of thing, I think you want a Crowan War in your main deck.
That makes sense.
Tons of creatures floating around that either can't be stolen by Claim or just are decks that are gumming up the board, I think it's worth its inclusion. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, the deck felt really good. When her opponent was playing a creature deck, it felt unlosable. The one game we did lose, we just didn't draw any removal or claims or anything. It was weird. We just drew a half of our deck that couldn't interact, which is odd for this deck. So
yeah, those losses are going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's Magic, but it was definitely doing some powerful stuff. I liked this one a lot.
And if you want to go a bit slower, the deck I was just thinking of that I got confused about, we also played a red-black mid-range deck, which also went 4-1. So apparently red-black is just very powerful. A lot of similar cards here. Still has Mire Titan Croxa, still has Timuret Calls the Dead, 1 Ox Vagonis, so you have this escape package. From new cards, we were supporting that with 2 Egon God of Death. To take a bit more advantage of the graveyard, we had some Liliana Waker of the Dead. Then the mid-range part here is that there's just sort of more removal. We're playing Bloodchief's Thirst, Heartless Axe.
The claim the Firstborn Village Rites package is replaced with the cheap removal and the Goldspan Dragons, essentially.
Yeah, so it plays very similar. Yeah, you're not trying to kind of cheese your opponent out with claim as much, just using normal removal. But this deck was also very strong, and yeah, this was what I had in mind when we were talking about Egon. There was also a game in this deck where we played Throne of Death, the backside of Egon God of Death, early, and just those extra 3 cards that it put into the graveyard meant that our Liliana on turn 4 could kill their Bone Crusher Giant, which is usually not something you're reliably able to do. And from there, we could freely escape Croxa, and they were struggling to find enough cards. We could escape an Ox, and they were struggling to find enough cards. We were just always able to do like 1.5 more things per turn than them because of the Throne of Death. It was quite impressive.
Yeah, this was specifically when we played the mirror match.
I should have mentioned
that. Throne was incredibly good. I mean, there's tons of people who have been talking about Rakdos midrange, posting different versions of this deck because it seems like a pretty easy place to start in the new format, as it was a deck that was, good early on last format. It has some really good pickups with Kaldheim, so kind of a no-brainer there. And it impressed. It was a great deck, very cohesive. The mana is so much better with the new red-black pathway, which was a huge thing before. I don't think I ever had any mana problems, which was, again, an issue that you would run into before. So I liked this one. It was good.
I guess one more note as I ramble about mana based in this episode. I was thinking about like adding blue to this type of deck. And the fact that decks are now so much more reliant on pathways, which are only single color when they're in play, means I don't think Croxa fits into 3-color decks anymore. Because that black, black, red, red on the back really discourages you from playing a pathway as anything other than red or black early.
Yeah, that was actually a question someone asked me on stream, is why I didn't have Croxa in the Jund mid-range deck. And I'm pretty sure that was almost the exact answer I gave them.
Yeah, pathways make it very hard to have multiple different intensive color requirements, even though it looks like you've got a lot of pips floating around. You got to commit, and it's very easy to commit to the wrong one.
Yeah. Next deck, another deck that we went 4-1 with. This is Blue-White Foretell Flash. The one loss I lost with this deck was the first game I played, and I will take the L on that one because I 100% just misplayed very poorly. Just the whole game, I feel like I made the wrong decision every turn with what card I wanted to foretell, what I was doing, what lands I was playing. It was just not a good look. But
I'm sorry I abandoned you. This was like shortly after I left.
Yeah, I figured it out for the rest of the games. And while some of the games went long just because of how the deck plays, I felt like I was in control of the outcome of the game from a pretty early point, which was really good. Cosmos Charger was fantastic in this deck. This is the deck that's playing Brazen Borrower, Skyclave Apparition, Charger, Glorious Protector, 1 copy of Allrund, 2 copies of Nico Eris, and then, all the the good Foretell cards, saw it coming, Behold the Multiverse, couple copies of Ravenform, which was actually fantastic. 2 copies of Doomscar, and then some counter spells, Scatter, Jawari Disruption. Shark Typhoons is another threat. Yeah, this deck felt good. I've always enjoyed playing, flash style decks. It was nice to get back to that kind of play style. Yeah, Cosmos Charger was excellent. The Foretell cards were very impressive. Just the 2 copies of Doomscar, I found a lot of use for them, which was good. So maybe you might want more of them, depending on how the format looks in the main deck. Right now, this is a best of 3 deck I'm looking at, but we were only playing best of 1 games during the early access event. There are the full 4 Doomscar in the 75, which I would 100% do if you're playing best of 3. But if you're looking to take it to best of 1, you might want to up the number in the main deck.
Yeah, there's a bit of tension between, this has been a tension that's existed in blue-white decks kind of for a while now in Standard, because there isn't a very good traditional control finisher. You're either playing things like Dream Trawler or maybe Yorion. Skyclave Apparition is now one of your best removal spells, so that's in most of these decks. And those naturally compete with the fact that you also want to be wrathing the board. So, yeah, that's just some internal tension that I think is going to naturally be in blue-white, and you're going to have to play around setting up or mitigating that bit of awkwardness. Was that ever an issue for you in your games?
It was pretty easy to maneuver around it, actually. I never actually ended up casting the Skyclave Apparition early if I had the Doomscar, because the Doomscar dealt with the permanents that Skyclave would have dealt with. So that conflict never actually came up, believe it or not.
That's good. Yeah, I'm just think it's interesting that I feel like had I seen this deck or had other people seen decks like this, a few years ago, the fact that you're playing a creature deck that has Wraths in it would be very strange. I don't know if that seems like a pretty new thing to me that decks started doing this. Yeah,
it's a little weird, but it's your threats, because you can cast the Doomscar early, you don't even though your threats are 4 mana threats, you don't actually cast them on turn 4 all that often. From what I found, you're casting them way later in the game, and way later in the game you've already cast your Doomscar pretty much in every scenario. So you would think they conflict with each other, but they didn't in practice, from what I found.
That's cool. That's interesting.
Nico Eris was a card that I included just because I wanted to see if it was any good. And it was okay. There was definitely one game that I was able to win because I was able to cast it and kill something.
Oh yeah.
So I'm still unsure about this one. It was kind of clunky at some points, but the 2 games I cast it, I killed something both games, and it was pretty important to kill the thing I did. So we'll see.
I'm curious about Nico Eris in a Jeskai shell. Here it can pick up Skyclave Apparition if you need to reset it onto something more important. But you can also pick up Brazen Borrower. And I think I have 2 copies in a Jeskai deck. And so you could reset Bone Crushers to get another Stomp, Brazen Borrower to get another Petty Theft. If you're playing this in a Yorion shell, you can pick up Yorion.
That is something I did forget. There were the 2 games I cast Nico Eris. Not only was I able to kill something, but I also was able to pick up a Brazen Borrower the turn after, which was excellent. So
yeah, that's a strong interaction.
Yeah. That I had completely forgot I did that on multiple occasions. That was very, very good. I'm back in on Nico Eris. I'm no longer unsure. It's good.
Nico also deals with this issue that I was talking about playing Wraths in a creature deck. You just pick up your creature and then Wrath them.
Yep. Yeah. Also solves that problem. This honestly, the games I played with this deck might be the next one I post on YouTube.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see those since I missed them.
But yeah, I was really impressed with the blue-white Foretell shell. I don't know if this is the way you want to be building it because, it's still really early, but I think it's a good place to start.
I feel like I'm leaning towards the idea that this type of tempo flash blue-white is going to be better than a full-on control just because of this issue with control finishers. You end up having to play creatures anyway, so you might as well just admit that and play this version.
Yeah, possibly. All right, last deck from the early access event, the one deck we went undefeated with, the one deck I didn't expect to go undefeated with, red-white mid-range. 4 Goldspan Dragons, 4 Skyclave Apparitions, 4 Bone Crusher Giants, 4 Seasoned Tallow Blades. We have 2 Redain God of the Worthy, 2 Magda Brazen Outlaw, 2 Rimrock Knights, rounding out the creatures. 2 Elspeth Sun's Nemesis. We have Fire Prophecies, Shatter Skull Smashings, and Myriad Calls. Maul the Skyclaves, Ember Cleaves, 2 Showdowns of the Skulls, and Elspeth Conquers Death. A weird array of creatures. I cheesed wins, just Seasoned Tallow Blade into Maul of the Skyclaves. People just died a Goldspan Dragon. Redain actually gave me value versus Snow deck, which was great.
Yeah, there was a game where they had to skip their turn 4.
Yeah.
Because their 4th land intertapped.
Yeah. A very weird mismatch of creatures, but I think some sort of red-white shell based around Goldspan Dragon and Showdown of the Skulls is going to be very good. This isn't it, but there is something here.
Yeah. I like that idea of interacting those 2 cards because the comparison to Escape to the Wilds that people are making with Showdown, like when you cast Escape, it lets you play that extra land so that on your next turn, when you can cast the cards, you have mana to do it. And so the idea of using the extra treasures or the extra mana from Goldspan Dragon to allow you to take advantage of all the cards from Showdown is quite interesting and strong.
Yeah. One card I overlooked that probably should be in this deck is Shepherd of the Flock because of its interaction with Showdown of the Skulls. I think that pairing is very powerful and needs to be looked into more.
Yeah, just keep picking it up, keep drawing cards.
Yeah. But yeah, this, I feel like a similar thing happened in the last early access event we played. We played like a red-black aggro deck that we didn't expect much of, but we just cheesed wins going 2-drop into Demonic Embrace.
Demonic Embrace, yeah.
And I did the similar thing here, just going 2-drop into Maul the Skyclaves. So
yeah. I mean, those were a lot of our losses in the early access were the same thing, right? Like 1-drop, 2-drop, then we got Ember Cleaved. Like,
yeah,
efficient, aggressive starts that are hard to interact with are perhaps overly represented in early access.
Yeah, and like decks like that generally always succeed in best of one. So
That's true. That's true as well.
Not a huge surprise there. But I have seen a lot of talk about various red-white decks on Twitter. I've seen a bunch of people playing them. Some form of red-white is definitely real in this format. I just haven't figured it out yet. But it will include 4 Goldspan Dragons. So craft those now.
That's like the main recurring theme that I've noticed through a lot of these decks that have done well is that there are a lot of Goldspan Dragons showing up here.
Yeah. All right, that wraps up all our decks. And that's all we've got for the episode today. Cam, do you want to add anything before we close this thing out?
I think that's about it.
All right. On that note, thank you all for joining the club this week. Make sure, as always, check out wizardtower.com for all your Magic single needs. If you want to check out all the decks we talked about today, you can find them on our Twitter or in our Discord at DWC Podcast 1 for Twitter. And have your listen to the show, whether it's Podbean, iTunes, any podcast app. Leave a review, rate the podcast, share it with your friends. Everything helps, keeps the show growing, bring it to new listeners. If you want to find all of the content for the DWC, you can find it on our website, dwc.gg. And be on the lookout for a new YouTube video coming soon with most likely that blue-white Foretell deck that I was just talking about not too long ago. Thanks for listening.
And reminder to everyone, since there has been a bit of a hiatus, Versus is coming back next week, next Wednesday night. So if there are particular decks that we talked about today that you want to see us bring to Versus, let us know, and we can do that rather than just picking random ones.
Yeah.
We can make some changes and see how they play out. Or if there's something you've seen on Ladder or something that you've been brewing that you want us to try, we do take requests for Versus as well. So whatever you want to see from Kaldheim, let us know. We can mix that in. Versus is returning.
Yeah, it returns next Wednesday night. Twitch.tv/Disorganized Wizards Club. We'll see you there. Catch you next week.